Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with weighing in on USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Grant Turner, Mark Ostrander. Mark, you got your new swag on. Look good, man. How are you?
Good. Yeah, this is stuff I got from you guys, and thank Grant and you and USA Wrestling for getting me some new stuff, so I didn't look like a bum.
We got to keep you looking fresh on those streets. So, so GT, you're in the middle of it, like obviously doing USA Wrestling stuff. Grandview had a great weekend last weekend. I saw all 12 got through, and 10 champs, a runner-up, and a third. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So did the guy that took third, did he have to run back home, or did you guys let him get on the bus with everybody else?
Well, he actually got kind of hurt in the semifinal match, so he ended up like defaulting all the way to sixth. So
okay, sixth. All right.
You know, it's yeah, no, they all like, hey man, don't get sick, don't get hurt. These are the rules. So
the standard is high for sure. So congrats to all the NAI teams that qualified, guys, this last weekend, and young ladies. I got to do a duel for Ottawa this year. I saw they qualified 11 on the men's side, and that's the most they've ever done. So shout out to them. Let's start with the Egypt tournament. We'll just talk on this quickly, right, GT? It is, we only sent women's and men's freestyle. There's obviously also a Greco tournament going on. We're recording this at 10 a.m. on Thursday. And the Greco has started, but no results yet. I did see one guy get chest wrapped 3 times in a row, which was freaking awesome on Instagram or Twitter. So if you want to look up core strength, go watch that video. But the U.S. we don't have a full list of the contingent yet. Is that all correct?
Yeah, and I mean, On Flow and the UWW stream right now, that should be getting ready for the medal matches in Greco. Currently right now at 10 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah.
So soon here shortly we'll have the 55 kilo matches coming up. So
okay. So we'll do a full next week's pod is just going to be that and conference previews. So and the agenda is loaded, and then you guys will be on your way to Wichita for NAIs. Yeah. So plenty to talk about next week. Not even concerned about it. Let's start with Iowa, Oklahoma State, because we were there. First of all, thanks to Joe's Place for having us do the live pod. I thought it went – our side of it went better. I want to thank Bill Gaukel for getting us on the air. He's the best. And this year having headsets instead of having to pass a microphone back and forth, I thought was a lot better. It was a lot of fun. Want to definitely thank Randy Lewis, Hardell Moore, and Phil and Gabe Arnold for coming on with us. Those guys were all awesome. I thought – different perspectives, old school, new school, in Oklahoma State. Mark and I were sitting, if I was sitting any closer, I would have been the voluntary assistant for the Oklahoma State bench. By the way, Ostrander, if you look up Mark Lundy, we're in the background about 84 of his pictures. So if you want to, prove to your wife or friends that you were there, there's plenty of pictures. I'll start with you because you were sitting next to me. What were your thoughts on the duel?
Yeah, I thought I kind of thought it'd turn out like that. I mean, everybody thought I was nuts the way I picked the matches. Iowa winning 8 out of 10, as well as Oklahoma State had been wrestling in the last month. But I just had a feeling that Iowa was going to wear on them. And I felt like Oklahoma State kind of lost their composure just a little bit, didn't open up, didn't do things. I saw Coach Smith getting very, very upset. Was not happy at all. I saw some of the wrestlers not happy at the coaching staff. So, it's just things that I saw. And, that it happened in the first 3 matches where they lost really close matches every match. But the other guys on the team see that's going on, and it's got to affect them in a certain way. But I thought overall, the competition – I like the way Iowa wrestled. It was nice to see Brands get a quality win over somebody because he's been so close all year long. I thought Saad wrestled pretty well for being off for the last month or so.
Right.
Warner, I don't know what Warner's doing. I just don't get what's going on with him because he was so different last year. He's not able to finish any of it. He gets in and can't finish. Guys are kicking out, and he just can't hold on to the leg, and I don't understand it. So
he lost the only takedown and won the match, so that's a trick.
Yep. So I mean, I don't get it. I think Real Woods is a real title contender. I'm having a hard time believing anybody's going to beat him the way he's wrestling right now. So, and Murin and Oklahoma State, what a great match that was. Those two went after each other, exchanged takedowns early on, and then it was just a dogfight, and it was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
GT, you go. Or you were in the presidential suite, right? You getting cheese and wine and all that stuff?
No, I was up there, a man with the people.
You and Shane are men of the people.
Men of the people, right? So
yeah, shout out to Shane Goodell as well for being there. This weekend.
So from where my picks were to what actually transpired, I think I had it 6-4 Iowa. As far as match count or whatever. Really, I mean, just fireworks to start off. Great matches out the gate, super close matches between, like Sheets and Kennedy, Nelson and Plott, Whitlake, Assad, Warner, Serber. Like, those are great matches to start. I mean, and once again, in full honesty, like, Iowa won all of those matches, all the close matches. But I think out of those two matches, I think Okie State was winning at some point in time during those matches, and then basically kind of either let it slip or whatever happened in every single match, right? So, Iowa brought out all of the alumni were there. It was a blackout, inside Carver, senior night, all of the things that basically Iowa could do in one duel. Having Oklahoma State at home, it was a great atmosphere, a great environment. Once again, the Hawks did really well, won all the close ones, and really, I mean, even in the match that Dayton won, Teskey was in it all the way up until the third period. Yep. Kudos to Teskey to wrestle a good match and kind of keeping it close with Dayton, and and
for trying to win, it was, for people that don't know, it was 4-3 with a minute and a half left. And he was trying to score, trying to win. I mean, he could have probably lost 6-4 pretty easily. And he tried to win, and he ended up getting majored. But I think you guys, GT, you're coaching now. I coached in the summer. Mark, you coached 100 years. You can always work with somebody that is maybe incorrectly or not technically perfect, but is aggressive, right? Like, you can coach aggression. Like, you can coach attacking. I think, like, to just kind of go through, real quick from my perspective. Number one, when those guys came over to where we were sitting, Oklahoma State said, "There's no way in hell we're just letting them start with Spencer Lee." It's like, we flipped or picked or whatever the right thing is. And so if you looked at it, if you're an Oklahoma State fan, probably 57 was the best weight you could have started at on paper. Right? Like, G ended up winning. It was a super close match. Be like, okay, G could win. Sheets could win. Plott's favored to win. Whitlake and Assad are like a 1 or 2 rankings apart, right? Serber just beat Elam. Like, you would think, like, okay, we could get up, 5-0 or 4-0 starting at 65. The duel was over by the time Cassiopeia walked out on the mat, because it was 12-0, and you're like, well, they're winning heavyweight, and they're winning 25. That's it. It's a wrap. Because even if Oklahoma State had ran the table, the duel's over. I don't know what the biggest margin of victory is in that series, and I don't know the most number of matches that came out of the gate, but I would wonder if anybody's ever won 6 in a row in that duel. Probably like Kyle Klingman or somebody knows. I thought Sheets almost, not almost won, but like, he attacked late and kind of turned the wrong way, but he was in on a leg. Plott seems like his confidence is messed up right now. Like, he looks different than last year. It feels like he could turn it around. Obviously, when you're top 6 guy, the path to getting to that good is a lot shorter than somebody who's never done it. Whitlake didn't wrestle with any urgency at all. Like, he was in the third period. And you guys know this. If I'm losing by 1, I got to go make something happen. I can't expect Grant to just come out of position. Like, I've got to do something even have to snap him into my legs and try to create a scramble. Serber lost that match when he picked down. He's winning 2-1. You can't get away. Just pick neutral. Even if Warner gets away, it's 2-2. You've got the whole second period, the whole third period, and 2 minutes of overtime to get one takedown. Cassioppi's just better than Doucette. Spencer Lee is better than Whitcraft. Dayton is better than Teskey. Real Woods is better than Carter Young right now. And Victor Voinovich might be my most fun guy to watch on Oklahoma State that isn't like a top 10 guy yet. That kid goes and goes. And, I mean, you know how you look at certain guys like GT, you have guys that are in the process right now. Like you had 12 guys wrestle. You got 20 more guys at least that you think can eventually be All-Americans. And they're not all winning every weekend, but you're like, man, that kid's going to be good because he's figuring it out. He goes hard. He's super coachable. And I have to imagine that he's the kind of guy that's doing all the right stuff in the room. And Seabrecht and Gefeller, interesting match, right? I mean, it could have been 9-1. G's smart. G's really good. He's going to catch somebody at nationals. He does that little quad pot and then pulls your leg under and rolls over. And honestly, if I was coaching, I would teach my whole team how to do that. Like if you need to get 4 or 6 points from the bottom, he gets that almost every time. I feel like Yogi Berra, like 72% of the time it works, 100% of the time. So, anyway, so congrats to Iowa. The senior night was really cool too. Mark and I stayed on the floor afterwards, and they honored all those kids, and you can tell they're really close. The post-match conferences by both coaches were interesting. And thanks to Gary Abbott for getting us the passes. Thanks to the Iowa Media Department for the parking passes and everything else. And hopefully we'll see everybody up there again next year for Penn State. They do a good job of letting us rotate up. So.
David, one thing I noticed that I've never seen before is they waited. Usually they do parents' night before the meet starts and, introduce the parents and the kids and say a little bit about them. They did it after the duel, and I bet 3/4 of the crowd did not leave. They all stayed, and they were giving standing ovations to these kids. And I know it's the last time Spencer's going to wrestle in a home duel on that mat with an Iowa singlet on, and that's a big thing. And, I mean, the fans really appreciated what happened Sunday, so I thought it was pretty neat.
I agree. So probably if you want to compare two duels and how great one was and how disappointing one was, Ohio State Cornell. So the duel was awesome on paper. Basically nobody wrestled. And it's interesting because I've done a couple mat chats and I've talked to these head coaches, assistant coaches about, hey, what do you think's wrong with the state of wrestling? And they're like, nothing's wrong. Wrestling's great. It's really healthy. That and the other thing. This is the problem. What happened? And like in the NBA, they call it load management. In wrestling, we call it peaking. I heard somebody like Bo Bassett posted about peaking, and some guys like, now listen to some 15-year-old tell me about peaking. And somewhere in the middle is probably the truth. But here's hard facts downside of what's going on. Each of those teams were paid to go there. Each team got NIL money. I know how much money they got. I talked to a super reliable source. And I think if you are bringing that team, you can't put in a contract so-and-so has to wrestle because a kid gets hurt. But if none of the big matches happen, you're probably just not going to pay them as much next time. I mean, I talked to somebody that said the ratings for dual meets on streaming are down this year. And like we just look at like, oh, wow, look how many people watch Penn State, Iowa, or how many people watch Iowa, Oklahoma State, or how many people go to an Iowa meet. Like it's overwhelming. It's very cool to walk in that kind of place. But if the general state is, well, Mark and Grant probably aren't going to wrestle, so why go? Why watch? That's problematic. And if we want the sport to grow, I don't know what the answer is, and I always hate being the person that points out a problem without a solution. But, like if Alabama plays Georgia to win the SEC East or West divisional title, even if one team's undefeated, like they're probably not sitting Bryce Young or Stetson Bennett. They're probably playing. So, because if you lose, there's consequences. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If you lose in the regular season or don't wrestle, there's very few consequences.
One thing I noticed, Dave, and football does the same thing. You get down after the season's over and you go to a bowl game, there's 5, 6 starters that don't even go. It's gotten to a point now where the bowls were important. Now they're not. It's only the national championship games that really.
Mark, do you have something near the microphone or anything that's causing?
No, I think it's Grant's because his things keeps going on and off and he's not even talking.
Whatever you just did fixed it, GT. So awesome. Yeah, so the bowl games, but that's an interesting thing because, like, if number 17 is playing number 20, nobody really cares who ends up 18th in the country. But, like, in the college football semis, everybody plays.
But if I'm a big fan of Cornell or Ohio State and I have money and I want to fly down and watch that duel because on paper that was going to be a great duel, and I go walk into that arena or that gym or whatever it wasn't a very big place.
Let's not call it an arena.
Okay, well, walked into that building and sat down and spent $2,000 or whatever on hotels and flights and everything else, and I saw that lineup, I'd ask for my money back. There's
All
no
sales.
reason they shouldn't even have it if that was what they planned on doing.
All sales final. And it was a money grab on several ends. So, but anyway, I think that's important to just understand because, again, I'm lucky enough to talk to different entities, and it matters. Like GT last year when Grandview wrestled Kearney, and that, the dual streak was online. I think it was earlier this year you wrestled Iowa State. Am I okay? Beginning of the season, right? Like to Iowa State's credit, they wrestled their guys. Now that's a credit to Grandview that Grandview's good enough that Iowa State's like, we can't send out our backups and roll these dudes up, right? Like there's two-way respect there, right? But also when Nick Mitchell scheduled that duel, he wanted to wrestle against David Carr and Panero Johnson and Marcus Coleman and Younger Bastida and those kind of guys, right? You understand that in any given meet, one guy might be out, right? And like, for example, like Austin Gomez hasn't wrestled since Yaya. He's hurt. I don't know if he's still hurt, but he got hurt. He lost the match by injury default. He's legitimately injured. Hopefully he's still not injured. But why would you rush him back? That's the other thing. Why would you rush him back? Because these matches don't matter. So I think there has to be something into creating a system where stuff matters more. But, that's probably a conversation for another day. So let's get into the rankings. Let me pull this up here.
Have the allocations came out yet, David?
Funny you should ask, Mark. Today is Thursday at 10 o'clock, and they're coming out today.
Okay.
So if we look at 125, there was not a lot of change from last week. No big upsets. 33. No big upsets. 41. No big upsets. And that's the other thing when you look at the Iowa-Oklahoma State duel, on paper, there was really only one upset. I guess, some of us were, like me, were picking upsets. So 49, Chalk, 57. Daniel Cardenas comes in at 11, and that's interesting because he had a really good Southern Scuffle. I don't know if he was injured and then came back, but that's probably the case for him to be out of the rankings and in up to that high. 65. Again, we talked about it last week. Like right now, it could be Carr and Monday on the same side of the bracket. Obviously, conference tournaments are going to determine a lot. Doesn't feel like a lot of things happened this last weekend that were really upset anything. So we look at the team rankings. One of the things that's cool about this, if you guys are listening, go on this Fantasy Grade website. So, for example, let's compare Iowa to Nebraska. Iowa has 66 points right now. And here's their chart. When you see all year, they've been ranked 2 or 3, 2 or 3, 2 or 3, 2 or 3. Okay. Then if you go back, Nebraska, I mean, they started out at 13, then fell. And then, now they're back down to 3. So, I mean, I think this is something. Let's do this. We'll try to do this one last time, fellas. Who are your 4 teams going into? We'll say now that you got to pick your final 4 for NCAAs.
Well, I'll take Penn State. I'll take Iowa. I'll take Nebraska, and I'll take Ohio State.
Okay. GT.
Penn State to win it. I think Iowa just has some guaranteed hitters, so I think they're going to get a trophy. So I think outside of the champ, I'm just going to say the other 2 teams or 3 teams.
Okay.
I think if Nebraska can hold on, I think they can do it.
Yeah.
And I think out of the kind of the others, I think it's going to be Iowa State.
That 3rd and 4th spot are so interesting, right? Like it feels like Penn State has clearly separated themselves. Iowa, it feels like they're second because of sort of their known, like as long as Spencer's healthy, he looks really good. Real Woods looks really good. They've obviously got a lot of firepower with Cassiope. And if Jacob Warner's ranked like 12th, and that's, then it feels like you're in a pretty good situation. I think Cornell's interesting because, I think Vito and Dayton is a super interesting match, right? Like, and Vito's never wrestled RBY, but Yanni feels like he's a fairly big favorite. Focus wrestled really well. Julian Ramirez has worked himself into that All-American conversation. They got some young guys like Unger and Cornella that can all get in there. And then Missouri, they fell in the rankings because Rocky lost and O'Toole lost. But if both those guys had won those matches, Rocky would be up 6.5 points and O'Toole would be up 4, and they would be 3rd. Now, again, I'm not sure they're going to win nationals, but 97's a weight where it feels like Rocky's as good as probably 5 other guys. And O'Toole, he's beaten Griffith. Griffith hasn't had the most impressive year in terms of margin of victory. I think the Big 12 rematch of Carr and O'Toole, assuming that happens, is probably one that people will spend a lot of time watching. So I'll be a homer and I'm going to take Cornell 3rd and Missouri 4th. So, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room there, a lot of things where it can go a lot of different ways. So let's talk about.
I mean, David, one thing before you get off this, if you look at you got off, sorry.
No,
but if you look at the 4th place team, which right now is Cornell, and I think they're at 53 points.
They're 55.
55, okay. Look down all the way down to the 8th place team. They're at 45. So they're almost 10 points away, which is basically one guy beating somebody else, knocking them out, and them being an All-American. That's how close it is for that 4th place spot.
Yeah. The other thing that we should definitely emphasize is there's no way to do this. All of these don't include bonus points, right? So like if we got GT on our team and he pins guys, like him taking 6th and pinning 2 or 3 guys is better than me taking 5th and winning a bunch of 1-0 matches, so, and some of these guys got some guys that put dudes on their back. So, it'd be very interesting to see. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting when you look at injuries, like Arizona State's at 39.33. If they had Teamer and he was just ranked, say, 3rd or 2nd, they would be right between Missouri and Cornell. So it goes to show you how one transfer, one injury, one something. And then if, Colton Schultz is ranked number 1, that'd be another, they would be ranked 2nd, which is kind of where I think I had him at the beginning of the year. So Schultz has taken, he's tapered his schedule. He's doing a lot of Greco stuff. So that's, that's a situation that can go a couple different ways. So I want to share this. This is probably the one thing that people that understand the least. So if you're listening, we'll try to talk through this and not watching. So what we're posting on the site right now is the rubric. And this is how the criteria is actually worked. And then I'm going to give you the background that I know about it. So head-to-head is 25% of the formula. Quality wins are 20%. We're going to explain quality wins in a minute here. Coaches rank 15%. And then common opponents, RPI, qualifier placement, winning percentage are all 10% apiece. Now, what happens is every single person goes into the rubric and every person gets a score and, 1 to 33. But if people are really close, that's where the committee is allowed to debate and decide. Like if, GT scores 4.3 and my score is 4.27 and low score wins, they can go, well, we think Grant's better because of this and move him up. So this formula or rubric was actually created by Justin Tritz, who started track wrestling. I mean, I know this from our time at track wrestling, and there is no perfect system. I think the things that are hard for people to understand in this, like, and Mark, I'll use you as an example because you're a guy, I truly respect your wrestling acumen, but RPI is a difficult one to get our heads wrapped around. And then the definition of a quality win is difficult to get your head wrapped around. And then the politics of coaches rankings, I think we can read the rankings, but like, for example, RBY was third last week.
Yep.
I mean, like, that's nuts, right?
It is.
So if we go to here's the seeding process. So this is probably important to understand that to qualify as an AQ, you have to have two of the three, a 700 winning percentage, be in the top 30 in the RPI or top 30 in the coaches rank. So for example, I was talking to a coach this morning. I mentioned Rocky Elam, and they go, well, he's fine because his winning percentage is over 700 and he's clearly in the top 30 of the coaches rankings. He doesn't have enough matches for an RPI, but he still qualifies. And the most you can have is 29 spots. When this comes out, all the weights will have somewhere between probably 24 and 29. And what that means is that Rocky Elam will qualify a slot for the Big 12. But let's say he goes 0-2 and I stole his spot. He now needs a wild card. Okay, so this is almost, GT, this is almost like the Daniel Dennis, Tony Ramos situation, right? Where Ramos qualified the weight for the Olympics and then Daniel Dennis won the spot, right?
Yeah, I think this is just basically you want your conference to do well and you want everybody in your conference to do well so you get more allocations.
Yeah, that's a very, very concise way of saying it. So here's the quality wins explanation. This is from a couple years ago because they were using Kyle Snyder as an example with Adam Kuhn. But here, I just highlighted like 3 or 4 sentences, and I'll read it for people that can't watch. After the regular season and conference tournaments, the final coaches ranking, RPI rankings, and D1 winning percentage for each wrestler is calculated. Those are used along with the thresholds defined above to determine which wrestlers correspond to which tier. After a wrestler meets 2 of the 3 thresholds for a given tier, they're viewed as a quality win in that category. And then there's a bunch of other examples and stuff like that. But basically, tier 1 is worth 6 points, tier 2, 4.5, tier 3 is 3, tier 4 is 2, tier 5 is 1, tier 6 is a half a point. So it's important to understand, like, for example, Mikey Labriola beating Makai Lewis is a 6-point win. Panero Johnson beating Gomez was a 6-point win. Gomez beating Yanni is a 6-point win. So when you get wins against big guys, it counts more. Like if you beat the guy that's on the like I just know this guy because he's from St. Louis, like Colton Hawks was ranked 30th. Like that's a half a point win. Okay. So it's important to understand. I think people think, well, everybody in the top 33 gets counted the same, and that's unfair. That would be unfair, but that's not how they're counted. So it's important that people understand that. So the next thing here, which is probably One of the more difficult ones is RPI. So trying to get this little thing to get out of the way here. So here's the RPI definition. Rating percentage index. It is a strength of schedule. It's your winning percentage times your opponent's winning percentage times your opponent's winning percentage. And you get a number. So this is back when Zahid was wrestling. They said, let's use Zahid as an example. He's undefeated. So his winning percentage is 1.00. He's wrestled almost everybody in the top 10. So his opponent's winning percentage is above average. Let's call it 0.65, which is 65%. And those opponents' winning percentage, we have no idea. Let's call it 50%. So they multiplied the 1 times the 0.65. And I apologize. I promised there was going to be no algebra today. But it comes out to a number of 0.325. And the number is meaningless. But when you do it with everybody else, we're all assigned a number. And then the higher the number, the better. So basically, the best you can do is be undefeated, beat guys that the only guys they lost to were you, and then those guys beat people that only lost to them and you. That's basically you wrestled really good people. So this is the incentive for wrestling a good schedule. And I know some people want to get rid of RPI, but I think based on what it's trying to do, we have, more people are concerned about people ducking people than wrestling too many good matches. So I think RPI is really, really important as a part of the formula. Okay. And then if you go back and look at RPI, it is only 10%. So I guess GT, you guys work in do they seed the NAIA tournament now, or is it still sort of blind draw?
Nope, everything's seeded. We have allocations, same kind of criteria.
So what do you like about, as a guy who's involved heavily, like you've seen Olympics and World Championships go from complete blind draws to unweighted brackets to now weighted brackets to separating 2 to separating 4 to separating 8. And again, people might not like how that's done, but something's better than nothing. So when you look at this, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think ultimately, I think there's a couple of head scratching moments, like where, in the coaches ranking, you have RBY be 3rd or, Truax be 30th or something crazy. Right.
Right.
So there are some of that stuff, but I think at the end of the year, I think the coaches get it ultimately right. So I don't necessarily mind the coaches ranking part when they're all paying attention and, they're basically focusing on getting allocations and all that kind of stuff to basically seed the NCAA tournament.
There's one other thing I don't think.
What was that, Mark?
I'm sorry. Finish your comment.
No. And basically, I think the true representation is you want the best people in the best matches. And, like the finals are like that's your showcase, right? So even if we were to go back into like, the 2000s or the whatever it is, 2004 Olympic Games where it was kind of a blind draw and you just have some bracket that happened. All of a sudden, the American, the Russian, the athlete from Azerbaijan or Canada or wherever are all on the same side. And then you have one lone, really, really good guy that's in the top 5 from France on that side. And it's like, well, he's going to make finals. And then all these other guys got to figure out how they're going to be able to get bronze on that one other side. So I think if you look at the tournament in its totality, like there's early matches that are extremely important and great. And then the finals is not necessarily a pure representation of what the tournament is, or the guy that got 3rd, if he would have had an opportunity to wrestle anybody on the other side, he could have been in the finals as well. Just the way that because of the randomness that all those things happen.
So one more question for you, GT, tied to this, because NAIA, you don't wrestle all NAIA schools all year, right? Like you're wrestling D1s, you're wrestling D2s, occasionally you're wrestling D3s, especially in Iowa, junior colleges, things like that. So are you guys building your schedule backwards, sort of towards making sure you're hitting the right criteria? Or are you guys just, wrestling the schedule you think makes the most sense for you, and you guys trust your process that you're going to get the right 12 guys to nationals?
Well, I think ultimately, also the NCAA coaches or any coach at any division, once again, I don't want to speak for all coaches everywhere, but you want to go see the best competition. You want to go see the people that you need to see. So if I don't get a chance to see anybody from the Southeast, I got to go to the Southeast or find a tournament that they're going to be at so that we can have either common opponent wins or to see them
head to head. Yeah.
So once again, that's why, the Cliff Keen Invitational exists. That's why the Southern Scuffle exists. That's why the Midlands exists. That's why the Soldier Salute exists. The Reno Tournament of Champions. It's like, hey, we might not be able to see everybody and we can't fly to everywhere to wrestle everybody head to head. All right, cool. Like, well, then that's a weighted experience where like, hey, you better, strap it up at the Cliff Keen because we might not ever get to see Cornell again.
Right.
So I think you got to, one, seek out good competition, which I think all of these things are basically alluding to. You want head-to-head competition, you want quality wins, and you want common opponents. But you have to be able to do that outside of your conference because it is a national tournament, and you got to go see somebody else from somewhere else in order to get maybe some common wins. So Nelson beating Plot's now in the Big 12. Brands now has a quality win over Plot. Plot has wins over everybody else. So there is a common opponent win, quality win, head-to-head competition.
It's
then
the
you can start
handcuff.
helping Nelson seed it out.
It's the handcuff thing. And Mark, I know you want to make a point, so I just want to say it's like the year Joe Colon pinned Ramos at Midlands. Like Joe Colon, assuming Tony Ramos wins the Big Ten, is going to be seeded over all those guys. So, Mark, go ahead.
I think one of the problems people are having us really struggling with, and I am myself, is that wrestling has changed. In the past, we had 30, 35 matches a year. Everybody wrestled in these big opens. They get 7 or 8 matches. You didn't see guys sitting for duels against somebody good. You put your best team out there, just like Oklahoma State, Iowa did. And Iowa's known to sit guys also. Don't get me wrong. But that duel on Sunday, David, we got to see the best guys on each team. We got to see them wrestle. They're not doing that anymore. Guys are only getting 12, 13 matches in for the whole season. That's all they're getting. Now, some of it's because they're dinged up a little bit and the coach doesn't want to take a chance at them losing because they're not 100%. Well, that makes it really hard to figure out who's going to get a qualification or an allocation for that conference. It's really hard to figure out. I remember, was it 5 or 6 years ago when Schneider was wrestling, but he was doing more freestyle than collegiate, and he had very few matches. Everybody knew he was going to be seated in the top 3 at the national tournament. Didn't matter if he had 5 matches in or had 10.
But theoretically, he should not have been.
He shouldn't have been, but the coaches sat and said, you can't do that to somebody else. This kid is the best kid in the country, at least top 2. He's got to be seated there. Well, because you don't want to be the number 1 seed, David, and get him first round.
Well, to follow that example and tie another example, which he's not as good, but good. Like in that scenario, arguably Kyle Snyder was the 33 seed. So he would have had the pigtail and then Gwiz in the round of 32 instead of that epic final. A couple years ago, when Oklahoma State shammied their lineup and moved up all those guys and Joe Smith came in, he was the 33 seed.
Yep.
I remember telling some people, I'm like, he's the 33 seed. Like, he's too good for that. I'm like, he has no matches at this weight. Like, he's going to be the 33 seed. He's going to wrestle a pigtail and then have to wrestle Alex Marinelli, who's rested coming off of 30 or 45 minutes because they give those guys the least amount of rest time they can so they're blended right back in. So I think it's important to understand the system. I'll just say a couple of platitudes so people get this. Like, number 1, this is how the system works. Number 2 is coaches coach to this system. So, for example, if GT was beating me 14-0 and he puts me in a crab ride and the referee goes crazy and calls him pinned, defensive pin, it behooves me to not wrestle a bunch of other matches if he's 29-1. because I'm going to get a better spot in the bracket. Coaches all understand that to a certain degree. Okay. I'm not saying everybody does it. And I do think this system is better. Like this weekend is the Missouri State tournament. It's the Oklahoma State tournament. And that's a formula. Like if there's 4 districts or 4 sectionals or 4 regionals or whatever, they go on lines 1, 5, 9, and 13. And they wrestle a 4. And then there's a 2 and a 3. And it's just like Missouri, that's the formula. And I'm pretty sure like Oklahoma only has 10 kids in a bracket. But Iowa is the same similar formula, right, guys? They don't seed the tournament.
No, they do.
They do now. They do now. They used to not do it.
Okay. So the vast majority, I stand corrected. The vast majority of, and that's good. Like, for example, Nocturne and Arnold being on opposite sides of the bracket is good, right? Anybody being on the opposite side of Ben Keeter is good for them. So,
but they still, David, they still mess up. I mean, I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter where it is. Deshaun Ross had 2 losses. He beat the number 1 ranked kid in the state, lost to him once and beat him once, and lost to a kid from Minnesota. Had 2 losses. He was the number 3 seed at state. The kid from Southeast Polk, who had 6 losses, was the number 2 seed. How that happens, I have no idea. Now, they're on the same side. I understand that. But it does make a difference. Would you agree, Grant?
I mean, separate out the talent the best you can. Once again, like high school rankings and high school kids, I think there's a lot more volatility to, wins and losses because it is, maybe like seeding a youth tournament. Like, these kids are like, they're really good. Once again, you should know that like Gabe Arnold and Tate Nackenborn should be on opposite sides of the bracket.
Yep. Now,
when it starts getting down into like the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, seeded kids at the state tournament, that it becomes a little bit more difficult unless you have a governing body, which once again, in Iowa, we're very fortunate to have somebody like Tony Hager, shout out to IA Wrestle, doing a lot of the legwork to, compile that data to help with that, ranking system and, or, records and whatnot. And once again, even in a smaller state, and we're using Iowa as an example, please know that this is a caveat to basically everywhere else that would potentially do this, is people from the southeast side of the state don't see everybody from the northwest side of the state. People from the northeast side of the state can't get all the way down to the southwest side of the state. So you might have a kid go 50-2 that's not wrestled anybody.
Yes.
And once again, there's nothing wrong with that. Once again, the school schedule is a school schedule.
Yep.
So I think that there's a lot of different things that go into the rankings, and it's really cool to break all this stuff down. I think the other thing is that, you just got to try to make it the best that you possibly can and have a reasoning for why you're doing it the way you're doing it.
Well, your point about the high school thing is really well said, because like when I wrestled, most teams didn't, like, we didn't go to Ironman and these other things. Like, we had the Hall of Fame duels this weekend. Liberty, Missouri wrestled there. They were shorthanded, but they wrestled and they lost all 3 duels and went home after the first day. They lost to Millard South. They're 12-4 in duels. They're going to win state. They're probably going to win state by 50 points, but they're going to beat teams that maybe are 12-1 because those teams don't wrestle the same quality of competition. I'll use the Hall of Fame duels because I saw that specifically, but it applies to Beast of the East. It applies to Ironman, applies to all these tournaments where, like, so take, for example, Ladarian Lockett. He lost a match at Ironman because he didn't step on the line. Okay? So he has a loss. Maybe there's somebody else in Oklahoma that's undefeated, but they've only wrestled kids in Oklahoma, not Ladarian. I don't care who that kid is. I'll bet on Ladarian. So some of this stuff gets really difficult. I think if we take it back to D1 college, which we're talking about is, and this is what another fascinating part of this, there are conferences that have built-in advantages and disadvantages. Like, for example, during the COVID year, one of the smartest things the Big Ten did, we're just going to wrestle each other. So, if Mark's first, Grant's second, and I'm third in the Big Ten, as long as I don't lose to the 4, 5, or 6 guys, if we're ranked number 1, 2, 3 in the country, I'm staying at 3. And the Big Ten teams don't have to schedule as hard out of conference because their conference matches are so good. So like a shout out to Iowa for wrestling in Oklahoma State. Those shout out to Penn State for wrestling Iowa State this year. Those kind of things, right? But there's other teams like in Arizona State, which has trophied the last 2 years. The Pac-12 is not deep. So they're chasing down anybody and everybody. And they wrestle Nebraska. They wrestle Missouri. They're just trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out as many ways. Like, I know they're trying to wrestle Iowa and they haven't worked it out. They're trying to wrestle Penn State. Penn State hasn't wrestled them since they beat them 4 years ago. I mean, it may have nothing to do with that, but I just know that they need those quality matches, both in terms of this criteria, also in terms of just, hey, David thinks he's really good. We need him to wrestle somebody and get his tail kicked. Those kind of things. So it's an interesting thing. I just think people need to understand. I personally think that they should make the rankings, the collective rankings of like the top 6 or 7 sources, which in no particular order are Flow, Intermat, Open Mat, Win, Amateur Wrestling News, and maybe even a WrestleStat. Like if you combined all those are 6 sources, made them count, maybe the collective counts as 5%. You peel like 1% off each of these. I think it'd be good. I already know the argument against it. Those guys miss stuff. Hey, so-and-so ranker likes Grant over David, so he's going to favor. I mean, no system's perfect, but these are people, as somebody that did the rankings, I know how much time I spent on them. Mark, you know how much time we spent on them?
Yep.
And I know how much time you spent looking at rankings when we were coaching in college. Like Grant, I shouldn't speak for you, but I'll bet you don't spend 15 minutes a week looking at the NAI rankings.
Nope.
I don't think Nick Mitchell does either. Like, you're not worried about it. It's not your job. Your job is to get your guys as high up in the rankings as you can and let somebody else figure out what that is. So I'm not saying they need to get rid of the coaches' rankings, but I think adding, the percentage to adding these other rankings as a percentage, I think would be interesting and would also help with transparency. So anyway, we'll stop sharing this. So not a lot left to talk about. I will be at the Oklahoma State tournament this weekend doing play-by-play. Want to thank Wes Ruth from OSSAA for setting this up for me. I'm going to get to call 2 or 3 matches of class 6, 5, 4, 3 in the girls. I'm going to get to work with Hardell Moore, Chris Forbes, Steve Dunlop, Steve Ferguson, and TBD. I don't know who's doing class 4, but excited to be doing that. Have headset, will travel. Missouri tournament is going on right now. They broke it up into 4 days. So class 1 and 2 boys and class 1 and girls were yesterday and today. And then 3 and 4 boys and class 2 and girls is Friday, Saturday. So good luck to all those kids. I know Kansas is this weekend. So like I talked to Kelly Heinecker, shout out to Derby and all those schools. And there's stuff's going on all over the country. And I'm probably paying a little more attention because at the end of all this, I have to document how well the teams did from the Hall of Fame Classic this year. Also, Illinois was last weekend, so shout out to all the kids in that tournament. My guy Matt Collum had his first state champion in Massey Odiati, so congratulations to them in Loyola. There's a million people that were again, we talked about it last week. If you're wrestling in that tournament, if you're trying to wrestle in that tournament, wrestling builds character. Wrestling defines you. It's awesome. The number of women and girls that are getting the opportunity to wrestle. The character, the stuff that we learn from wrestling is not gender specific. It's just helping people become better people, learning how to overcome adversity, win with dignity, lose with character, all those sort of things. So, watch all that stuff. And GT, the Egypt tournament is on both Flow and UWW. Is that correct?
Yep.
So if you want to watch some power bombs, I'm telling you that chest wrap sequence was crazy. Did you see it, GT? This guy goes like 3 times in a row. He must have been losing because the first 2 would have been enough for a tech, so he had to be losing to do it 3 times because he went 4-4-4. One more, he would have been Moses Malone. So, all right. Anything else before we sign off, boys?
No.
All right. For Mark and Grant, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. See y'all next week.